Okay. So, good evening, everybody. For another edition of Jews in the News. It's January 13th, and I had advertised yesterday or this morning, I don't remember when I sent out the email, that I would lead a session about the International Criminal Court and its decision to um, charge um, Prime Minister Netanyahu and former Defense Minister Gallant with war crimes. So it is a subject worth talking about. But then I realized, yeah, that those charges came down a month or so ago, but there are fires raging in Los Angeles. So I wanted to talk about that instead. The fires in Los Angeles, just a couple elements related to that and how what it has to do with Jews in the news. So, um, fire in general, and then the fires in Los Angeles now specifically. So, a traditional perspective on um, on fire and any other natural disaster, the traditional perspective is that God causes everything. And we we know this famously from the High Holiday Liturgy. Berosh Hashanah yikatevun, v'yom tzom kippur yechatemun. On Rosh Hashanah it is written, on Yom Kippur it is sealed. Mi ba'esh, who by fire, mi b'mayim, who by water, and then a whole other long list. But Rosh Hashanah yikatevun, right? So it's an acknowledgement, that prayer, unatana tokef, that God determines what happens in the world, specifically knowing that the prayer was written 500 years ago. But if it was written now, specifically knowing what would happen in the life of each and every one of the 8 billion people in the world. So 500 years ago, how many people in the world was it 1 billion even? Anyway, that's the idea. That's a traditional idea, Jewish idea, that God knows what will happen to us. Now, that very same prayer in Atana Tokef says, Uteshuva, utefila, utzedaka, ma'avirin et roa hagazera. I just want to say for people who just came on expecting me to be talking about the ICC's charges of war crimes against Prime Minister Netanyahu and former Defense Minister Gallant, I decided, executive decision, not to talk about that tonight, but to talk about the fires in Los Angeles. So you're welcome to stay on, or you're welcome to leave. And I'm sorry for misinformation that went out yesterday, but I realized this is more important to talk about now because it's a now the charges against Netanyahu and Gallant, they'll be there for a while, and I'll talk about it another time, I promise. So the Unatana Tokef prayer goes on in the middle of the prayer after this list where we're singing Barosh Hashanah Yikatevun Yom Tov Kippur Yechatemun, Uteshuva, Utefila, Utzedaka, Ma'avirin et Roa Hagazera. That teshuva, repentance, prayer, and acts of tzedakah. However, we want to translate that word. It can mean justice, it can mean charity, acts of loving kindness. All those things can avert, ma'avirin, can avert at roa hagazera, the evil of the decree. So in other words, we know that God's going to determine what's going to happen to us, but we have a say in what's going to happen to us by our actions. And if we do good, then that can have an influence on what God will do or the effect of what God does on us. So that could mean two things. Either it can mean that our good deeds can convince God not to do something that God had planned to do originally to us, or it could mean that God's going to do to us what God's planning to do to us, but if we are devoted to teshuvah, prayer, and tzedakah, then the effect won't have as bad an effect on us as it would have if we weren't involved in that. So, in other words, if we're involved in community, if we do good deeds, if we have a strong faith, then those things help us withstand things that happen in our life. If we don't have those things, then it's as if, according to religious tradition, we are wandering aimlessly and then even more susceptible to things that could happen. So teshuvah, prayer, and tzedakah are kind of our resources that we keep on our person always to protect us, to give us grounding, to enable us to withstand crisis when it happens. So that phrase unatana tokef could mean either thing. That it could mean that our acts of good can cause God to not do what God was planning to do, or it could mean that our acts of good help us reinforce ourselves or give us the armor to be able to withstand what God will do to us. Okay, so that's the Unatana Tokef prayer, and that's traditional theology, and the other technical word is theodicy. Theodicy, understanding good and evil in the world. Okay, so with that traditional idea then, looking at the fires in Los Angeles, we could understand either God brought those fires on the people of Los Angeles, because God, in God's infinite wisdom, that we have no idea anything about God's plans, because we are finite, God is infinite. God brought those fires, and it's just preordained. Now, I want to say that with Unatana Tokef, with the fires, with just this idea, I don't buy into that, by the way. So I don't buy into the traditional theology there and theodicy. I don't think that that's how the world works. It doesn't. That's not my way of understanding Jewish tradition, and it doesn't provide me with a sense of comfort. It's rather, I think, a scary way of looking at the world, and a threatening way of looking at the world. In other words, we're doing good things because if we don't, God's going to get us. I don't think that that's a religious perspective to have. It doesn't inspire God's love or compassion in me. In fact, it inspires God's wrath and revenge and fear in me. And I personally, I don't think that that's what religion is supposed to be about. So, but I'm still focusing on the traditional idea of understanding natural disaster. And fires are a little bit, these fires are not necessarily natural disaster only. In other words, I think there's crime tape around at least one location where authorities think the fire may have started, so that these fires could have been man ignited, as opposed to a lightning strike that could cause the fires to start. That would be a totally natural disaster that man, with a capital M, had nothing to do with it. So fire is different when it comes to natural disasters, because it could be either totally natural or it could be man-made that causes then nature to go up in flames and threaten property and lives of human beings and animals too. Um, so that's point number one that I wanted to say about that there is this religious perspective, this traditional perspective, how to understand disasters like this. Okay, so like I said, I don't personally agree with the traditional perspective on disasters and evil in the world. I do believe that we find God in our response to looking at the world around us or being affected by the world around us. So that is that God doesn't cause the fire, but we find God in how we respond to the fire. God doesn't cause people to die. We find God in the way we respond to people dying. Okay, and so that's how I understand, and that's how I've been teaching, and that's what I've been preaching about for the past 30 years at Shul. So the response to the fires is what I wanted to share my screen for one article at least from the New York Times. And this is an article that came out January 11th. And so you may have seen it if you subscribe to the New York Times. You may have seen it digitally. I saw it when it came out. So synagogue congregation grieves in borrowed home after LA fires. So this is just one story of many stories about the Jewish community in Los Angeles, how it's been affected. So I just want to, it's just the first half I want to read about because then it goes on to how a church responds to the fire. Rabbi Jill Gold Wright looked out at her congregation Friday night and uttered a simple statement with a significant pause. I notice that you are here. That was because under the bright lights in the theater of the Mayfield Senior School, a Catholic school in Pasadena, members of the Pasadena Jewish Temple and Center had gathered for the first time in a borrowed space. Now, Pasadena Jewish Temple and Center is a conservative synagogue, and I had heard about this through my rabbinical assembly listserv and other conservative movement sources that synagogue had been destroyed in the fire. For the congregation which lost its campus and home of over 80 years to the Eaton fire, it's just the beginning of a period of borrowing and wandering. The prayer books and prayer shawls and yarmulkes were all loaners from nearby synagogues. One thing wasn't: a Torah rescued from their burning building. So I don't know if they just rescued one Torah, if they managed to rescue all the Torahs. I think they did manage to rescue all the Torahs, but the building, this 80-year-old building, went up in flames. At least a dozen families in the congregation lost their homes in the Eaton fire, but on Friday night, Rabbi Gold Wright and Cantor Ruth Berman Harris led a celebration of the community that was still there. And for nearly 45 minutes, song washed over the exhausted and anxious families and friends who came together first for a potluck dinner and then for familiar music and fellowship. Let's borrow the melody from the Saturday version of this one, Cantor Berman Harris said. It was the more upbeat version of Mi Chamocha, a prayer praising God for deliverance. It's the right one for tonight. Finally, when the rabbi began the Jewish prayer for the vulnerable, the Hashkivenu, it's a prayer that's only in the evening service, not in the morning service, a prayer asking for protection from the evil forces that surround us. That's what the Hashkivenu prayer is. Finally, when the rabbi began the Jewish prayer for the vulnerable, the Hashkivenu, the mood turned. She faced her congregation crying. Perhaps because she didn't think she could make it through a sermon, she invited another rabbi, Joshua Levine Grader, who once led this congregation and now runs a local interfaith nonprofit, to give a message. His house had burned down, but he didn't talk a lot about it, focusing instead on what was still intact. Judaism is not about space, he said. It's about people. It's about community. The space The space is in service to something greater, and that can't be taken away by fire. So it is a beautiful message. Yes, community is what Judaism is all about and what enables the people to survive. But it's interesting, just as a side note, Judaism is about space. In fact, Torah and the Jewish Bible teaches religion, Judaism, about space. It's all about coming to the temple in Jerusalem and bringing the sacrifices. It's only since the temple was destroyed 2,000 years ago that space isn't as important as it used to be. So just to understand a little bit about history, that today, absolutely, it's not about space, it's about community. But that's not to say that our synagogue still isn't a holy place. It is. It is a holy space, but we don't need the synagogue in order to be Jewish and do Jewish. We can be Jewish and do Jewish independent of space, which hadn't always been the case when the temple was standing in Jerusalem. So that's his message. And what happened with the synagogue, that synagogue that burned down, and the people who then were able to meet in this school to continue life as a community. And by the way, this synagogue, which is led by Rabbi Jill Gold right now, is on the list looking for a new rabbi. Every year, the conservative movement publishes a list of synagogues that are looking for rabbis, and the Pasadena Jewish Center and Temple is on the list. So how they're going to be able to find a new rabbi, how they have the means to be able to do that, there's a lot in flux in that community. And then on the opposite side of this is this article, and I apologize for the ads, but I want to refresh the page because there's a video here. Yes, that's what I wanted to see. Okay, so this is an article about a synagogue that survived the Palisades fire has become a refuge for many who lost their homes. Okay, so Pasadena Jewish Temple and Center, that synagogue burned down, and people had to find another. The synagogue had to find another home. This is about a synagogue that survived 2 blocks. So a synagogue that's you could fill the sanctuary with your congregants who lost their homes, a reporter told Kehilat Israel's clergy. 2 blocks away, a school reduced to ruins. Across the street, rubble. Under the door, ashes. And yet, at Kehilat Israel, things look much the same as they did at the beginning of the week before the fires. That's what the clergy found when they re-entered their synagogue's building on Thursday in the wake of the blaze that devastated Pacific Palisades. A reporter with NBC News, who himself grew up at Kehilat Israel, accompanied Rabbi Amy Bernstein, Rabbi Daniel Scher, and Cantor Chaim Frankel as they took stock of their synagogue's remarkable survival amid a swath of destruction that has effectively razed the Los Angeles neighborhood. Surreal, said Scher. Unbelievable, said Bernstein, gazing at the reconstruction of synagogue's undisturbed hedges and unmelted security fence. So this is what I want to show you. It's 1 minute and 58 seconds.
Everything across the street from the synagogue burnt down, but the synagogue is still here. What's it like to see it?
Surreal. Unbelievable.
For Rabbis Amy Bernstein and Daniel Scher and Cantor Chaim Frankel, seeing the Kehilat Israel synagogue standing amid so much devastation is staggering. Look at this. This is the ash that came through the door?
Yeah.
I can't believe it. I'm so glad it's here.
Knowing what happened outside of these walls and seeing even just this piece is...
The remnants of the Palisades is right here.
Wow. This is the community in which I went to preschool.
Yes.
My siblings had their bar mitzvahs here.
This is now a refuge for the entire community, not just the Jewish community.
You know what, Chaim? You could fill the sanctuary with your congregants who have lost their homes.
Correct.
Yes.
At least this home is standing for so many people, so many of us. This is our home.
When tragedy strikes and disaster strikes, we turn to our faith. And that's what this represents. I sing this lovingly for our community to heal. Baruch Shem Kevod, Shem Kevod Malachuto, Le'olam
Tonight, a visit by President-elect Trump to California's
Oops,
devastated
just a
wildfire
second.
zone is under active discussion inside.
Okay, sorry about that. Okay. So two opposite stories. Synagogue that burned down and what they were doing to look for a new home. A neighborhood that burned down, and across the street the synagogue is perfect. Like not a scratch, not a char on the building at all, just ash that blew in under the door. So it's just the randomness of what has happened in Los Angeles and the utter devastation, and that it's another red flag warning tonight through tomorrow at least in Los Angeles, so that the threat that the fires could burn out of control again is really quite devastating. Really incredible. The pictures that we see on TV, on other social media sites about the utter destruction that has gone through there. How many thousands and thousands of homes destroyed, and I can't imagine how long it'll take for people to rebuild. And the little bit of interviews that I've heard, people though still sound kind of upbeat, and that they're determined to be able to make it through. And a lot of celebrities lost their homes, and Billy Crystal famously last week said that the home that he's lived in with his family since 1979 burned down. Okay, just imagine the memories. Photo albums, like who has photo albums anymore, but people have photo albums and other mementos and family heirlooms and things like that that go up in flames. How do people be able to survive all of that? So I'm keeping everybody muted until anybody has a comment or something to share. The perspective I'm thinking about is I visited two people today who are in hospice, and speaking to their spouses. The spouses are rightly shaken by what's going on with their beloved spouse, and yet both spouses are incredibly strong and extremely with it. In other words, like the people who have been interviewed in Los Angeles, somehow there's a resilience that I see for most of the time when I meet with families, when God forbid somebody dies. There is a strength and there's a resilience there, and I can't explain it. I can't explain it, but there's something within our DNA that enables us to withstand such crisis. Now, there could be a limit to how many crises we can withstand at the same time. And the fires in Los Angeles are quite devastating, because it could be one thing if one house burns down, that family can go to a neighbor or some other place close by to seek shelter. Here's an entire entire neighborhoods have burned down, so entire communities need to seek shelter. And somehow they're finding it, and they kind of are resigned to their lot, and somehow they know that they're going to make it. So I think that that's the human spirit is quite remarkable in that way, and it's something that we should glorify and focus on that the just remarkable human spirit, and and the randomness of the fire that one synagogue burns down completely, and another one escapes unscathed for now. So I just wanted to share that, the theodicy behind natural disaster, and just to share the beautiful human interest stories, just two of many that are coming out of the fire. And there is a prayer that I shared from the Bima this past Shabbat, and I want to see if I can find it to share it again. Oh yeah, here it is. Just a second, I'm going to go to it. Here we go. Yeah, let me share my screen. And okay, so Rabbi Nicole Guzik is one of the rabbis at Sinai Temple in Los Angeles, the synagogue where Rabbi David Wolpe was the rabbi. And so she wrote this beautiful prayer. Ribono Shel Olam, Master of the Universe, protect those that are impacted by the devastating Southern California fires. Guide them towards shelter and safety. As family, friends, neighbors, and fellow Angelinos experience physical and emotional loss, may we turn towards each other with open homes and open hearts. God, spread a blanket of security over the firefighters and first responders that serve our community. Grant them strength and courage, and may each one come home safely to those they love. Let us be reminded of how to help one another. Holy One of blessing, give us increased compassion and an abundance of kindness, that we may extend our hands and hearts to those in need. As the prophet Elijah experienced, there was a great and mighty wind, splitting mountains and shattering rocks by God's power, but God was not in the wind. After the wind, an earthquake, but God was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake, fire, but God was not in the fire. And after the fire, a small, still voice. God's small, still voice runs through each one of us. May God's voice compel us to reach out to each other and find pathways that lead to hope and ultimately peace for all in need. Amen. So that's what I wanted to share this evening. Anybody have a question, thought, or comment? So, like the prayer says, our prayers are with everybody in Los Angeles, and as Jews, we pray for the Jewish community as well. There are funds that I had advertised, disaster relief funds. The United Synagogue of Conservative Judaism has one. The Federation of Los Angeles has another one. And I urge you to Google those and to contribute if your heart moves you to do that, to help the community deal and to cope. So just wish everybody a good night, and maybe next week, next Monday night, we'll talk about the ICC and Netanyahu and Gallant. Have a good night, everybody.